Hi all, and welcome back to our series on creating a dynamic facade panel. In this part, we'll continue the creation of our custom facade panel by adding the sun hood and associated structure. Then we're going to export the model to a custom node. So let's get started. So continuing on from where we left last time, to start setting the offset for our hood structure. Let's drop in a new point. So let's call this hood structure offset, and we'll call this offset 1 because we're actually going to have a series of offsets, I suppose, one for the base of the structure and one for the top of the structure. And I'm going to set this again by direction and distance from origin, and we'll do the same thing as what we did in part 2. So let's set the origin to be the triangle 1 center point. First set the drop down and we'll pin the distance from origin first, and the direction for this is obviously going to be our triangle 1 CS and dot Z direction. So for the distance, we haven't actually set up a variable for this one yet. So let's say hood structure offset distance equals 200. And what that actually does is it automatically creates that expression node for us. So let's just grab it and drag it up with the other variables. Let's highlight those and we right click on the colored node, say colorize node, and hit OK. So let's drag in a polygon node and we'll rename this triangle 1 hood structure offset poly. And let's set the method to copy transform geometric contents. And let's set the input for that to be triangle 1 poly. And so you can link it or just type it in. So where we want to copy from, we want to copy from the original sort of base center point, and we'll target triangle 1 center point, and we're going to copy it to the new point we just created, which is hood structure offset 1. And you can see in the view, there's our polygon. So for this, to make the polygon a little bit easier to target and see in the view that this is the structure polygons that we're creating, or the hood polygons, I'm going to click on the general inputs, and instead of having it color.white, I might change this to color.blue-violet. That'll just give us a visual representation of those polygons that we're just creating for the structure. So for the variable we created for the hood structure offset, let's actually target that to say it's going to be the frame depth divided by 2 plus the full glass thickness. And that should move that polygon down to sit on top of the glass. So now we've got the start point for that. So now what I'm going to do is drag in a cell. And for this, I'm going to click on library name so we can actually that. And we've got a shared cell. So there are going to be shared cells in the final view. So the library path for this, I've just set up a quick library on my C drive. So I'm just going to type in that C/temp/facade cells.cell and close inverted comma. So in the cell name, I actually call this hood corner post. So I just put that in inverted commas. And the placement for this is going to be on a point. So I'm going to actually link it to this triangle. So if I link it to the triangle, it'll fail because it doesn't have a point. So what we need to do is dot vertices. So I'm going to place it on a vertice, and I'm going to say vertice 2, and that places it on this sort of corner down here. And we actually might want it on, I think we might want it on 2 corners. So I'm just going to copy this, go back to the beginning and put a curly brackets in and put a comma, and then say put point 1 and point 2, and then close the curly brackets and hit apply. You'll actually see we actually got 2 cells now. And as we array across, the adjacent generated node type will then fill in the missing corner posts. So let's rename this corner post, and I'm going to make it orange as well because that's one of our outputs. I'm going to right click on that and say colorize node. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is set up the base point for the actual hood itself. So the hood actually sits up at the top of these posts. And I want to link that with some structure. So first of all, I think I'm going to create another triangle polygon. I'm going to offset it again and create a polygon that's sitting up at the center of the top of those posts. What I'm going to do is just copy those 2 offset and polygon nodes we had before, and I'll paste them over here. Let's rename these a little bit. Triangle 1 hood structure, instead of offset poly, then I actually want that to be offset poly post top, and in here the offset distance, and let's go post equals, and we'll just make that 200. That was an easy way of creating a new polygon at the top of our posts. Then we look at that variable we just created. Instead of being 200, let's change this a little bit and actually define it from where the last one was. So let's copy all of that. Let's copy that text, and I'm going to add 135. So from the bottom of my post up to the center of that top section is actually 135. So I'm just going to colorize that node as well. And so now we've got a polygon sitting at the top of our structure, and this is where the hood's going to be generated from. So first I'm going to create some lines that run around this. So I want to create sort of a rod between the posts. So for this, I'm actually going to say, let's create a line by chaining. And then what we just need to do is target the vertexes of our triangle. So let's drop in the triangle and we'll open it up so we can see it a bit easier. And dot vertices. Then we just need to target the number of the vertices that we're trying to start from. So for this, let's start at 0 and let's copy that. And at the beginning, put the curly brackets, then put a comma, and then we're going to say vertice 1 and then vertice 2, and then close the curly brackets. And if we hit apply, close that, we should see now we have a line that runs around the outside of that, just the two outside edges of that triangle. So let's call this hood structure line. And then for this, I'm just going to drop in a solid node and change that to sweep profile along path. And if I open up the drop down, I can set that to circle, and we can scroll down and pin out the diameter setting. And so for this, it's fairly easy. We just link up the hood structure line and just type in a diameter. For this, I'm not going to use a variable. I'll just hard code, say 20. And you can see now we have a rod between our posts. And for this, I might just change its family and part to facade frame as well, just so it gets a family and part as well. So similarly, we're going to colorize our node. So we select solid one, and we'll select one of the other colored nodes, and we'll just right click and say colorize node. So then it's orange as well. What we're going to do now is set up the center point and the height of our actual hood. What I'm going to do is actually place a point on one of the line segments of one of the polygons. So I'm going to call this hood height start point, and it's going to be similar to the other one that we placed before. It's going to be placed on a parameter along a curve. And the curve we want to target for this is actually the hood structure offset. You can see by default it places it along the first edge. We don't want that. Then type in the .control polygon .line segments, and then we target which line segment we want. So for this, I'm going to test, I think it should be 2, and close brackets, hit apply, and instead of being on the first line segment, it's now on the third line segment, so 0, 1, and 2. So that's got our point in the right spot. What we need now is a line to actually generate the height of our hood. For this, I'm going to use a start point, direction, and length. Start point being the point we just created. The direction, we can actually use the triangle 1 CS as our direction, as Z direction for that. And the length for this, let's link it to that variable we created at the input. So let's link that to input hood height. You can see it's quite small. Let's just rename this first to be hood height line. So the default value I set for that variable is actually 50. So let's change that to be, change that to be 500. So that's better. So now we can see our line. So that's going to be the center point or the highest point of our hood. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to create a, similar to how we created the line around the back side of the triangle, I'm going to create a line from sort of one corner of the triangle up to the top of that hood height line and down to the other corner of the triangle. So let's do a similar thing. We'll drag in a line, change its name to hood opening line. Consider this side of the hood to be the opening. And I'm going to change this to by chaining. And we'll do a similar thing to we did last time. We want to target the polygon. We can actually copy that variable from the last one we did. And let's paste it in this one. So let's open up that, and we'll place in triangle 1 hood structure offset poly post top, and then vertices 0. Now we want to do is target the hood height line. So we can actually just select that in the view, and it actually populates it for us. But we need the endpoint. We go .endpoint, and then we can just copy that first variable again, or that first bit of text, and then change it to 0.2, which will be that point over on the other side. And if we hit apply, we should see now we've got a line, or 2 lines actually, one that goes up to the top of the height line and one to back down to the other end of the triangle. So I don't want this hood to be sort of sharp at the top. I'm going to drop in an arc, and I'm going to fill it between those 2 lines. So in here, let's change it to fillet tangent to curves, and we'll change the name of this to be hood opening arc. Now the 2 curves for this are actually part of that hood opening line. So we'll just select or link up hood opening line to both of those, and that won't exactly work because we want to just target this. So this one is, if you hover over it, this is hood opening line 1, and that's hood opening line brackets 0. Let's type in here and just put in those brackets. So the first one we want to target is bracket 0, and the other one being bracket 1. There's a selector point, and this sort of, I believe, sets the side of which the fillet's going to be. So for this, I'm going to actually use the point at the bottom, and so that's the hood height start point. And you can see there's an arc, but we didn't actually set the radius yet. So let's just click the drop down and pin out the radius, and we actually set up a variable for that at the beginning. So hood fillet radius is our radius for that. Now I've got a radius in the corner. And I'm going to do a similar thing to the 2 lines that we set up for the rod structure, and we're going to put an arc between those as well. So we'll paste that node again, and we'll change the inputs to be hood structure line and bracket 0, and for curve 1 it'll be hood structure line bracket 1. And there you can see our little arc between those structure lines. What I want to do now is place some lines from the sort of post or the corners of the triangle up to that arc and then down the other side. For that, what I'm going to do is actually put in just some basic lines, one called hood opening line 1 and hood opening line 2, and then input the variables for the start and end points for those lines. I'll try and keep those flow of those lines consistent. So what I'll do is I'll start with a start point, and I can just select in the view and get opening line 0 and then use dot start point, and the end of that line is actually going to be the arc start point. And that gets the first line set up. Let's get the second line done. So the start point for the second line is actually the arc, and this time it'll be the arc, but it'll be the endpoint. So we'll click on the arc and we'll go dot endpoint. And for this, the endpoint will be the other line and dot endpoint. So we get the flow of the lines running across that opening. The last part of this is I'll drag in a curve and I'll set that method to composite curves. And what I can do is actually just click in the input and actually select the elements for the inputs. Hood opening line 1 and holding control down, click on hood opening arc and then hood opening line 2 and hit enter. And you can see there's our curve. So let's rename this hood opening curve. So during some testing for this video, I actually created the hood using just two curves and then lofted them together. It didn't create a nice smooth surface. For this example, what I'm going to do is actually create some points along that curve, and then I'm going to create a B-spline curve for the basis for lofting together. So for this, I'll just drag in a point node and we'll rename it hood opening points. And we'll just change the method for that to be number along curve, and we'll link that to the hood opening curve. And I think the number for this, I'll set to 40, which should be enough points. So with that in place, let's drag in a B-spline curve. And we can change the name of this to be hood opening B-spline curve, and then just link up the points to that. And that's one curve created. Let's create the other curve at the base of this. I'm going to follow the same method we did for the hood opening, and I'm going to call those hood structure 1, and I'll copy that and paste it in hood structure line 2. And I'll drag in the curve and call that hood structure curve, call that hood structure points, and I'll just change that to number along curve and do a similar thing and link up the hood structure curve to that and set the number to 40. And then I'll drag in a B-spline curve and call it hood structure B-spline curve and link that to the hood structure points. What we can do now is just set up the first hood structure line 1 and line 2, and it'll be based on the hood structure line. So we could just do a display set on that so you can actually see it. There's line 0 there and line 1 on the other side, obviously. So let's type in hood structure line. And I just realized I actually spelled it incorrectly. So start with this one. So we'll just put in hood structure line 0 and start point. Now I'll go back over and I'll just adjust that name. With GC, if you adjust a name, it actually populates through the model. You can see over here now it actually is updated. Now we want to be the arc. So let's click on link the arc up. So it's now hood opening arc 1 dot start point. And then we can link up the other one. So let's link up the start point for that being hood opening arc endpoint, and then hood structure line brackets 1 dot endpoint. Then we just link up our curves. So linking up our curves being hood structure line 1, hood opening arc 1 is incorrect, but I'll rename that in a minute, and hood structure line 2. I'll just go back and rename this one because it's incorrect. Let's just go hood structure arc, and that'll repopulate its way through that node tree. So now we've got two B-spline curves. Now I'll just drag in a B-spline surface and rename that hood surface, and let's set that to loft curves, and we just need to select those two curves. And then you can see a nice little lofted surface working quite well. I don't want to leave this as a surface, so let's thicken that to a solid, hood solid, and the same thing, we can actually offset from surface this time. So let's link up the surface to the offset surface, and then above and below we've got our variable for that, so it's hood thickness, and we'll do the same thing, we'll divide by 2, and then the bottom one the same thing, hood thickness divided by 2. There we go, nice solid. I could open up that and click on the families and parts. So we can select curtain wall, and I could probably make that, let's make it spandrel metal panel, so it's a little bit different. The last part of the hood, I'd like to actually boolean out a section at the back of the hood. For that I'm going to drag in another solid node, and that's going to be a sphere by a center and radius, and I'm going to set it to that corner of that hood structure polygon. Scroll back, and it's the hood structure offset polygon top of the post top, and radius, the radius is going to be set to the radius we set, hood corner cutout radius. And what we need to do is just, because we don't actually have a point, we didn't set a vertice, so dot vertice, let's set it to 1, and that should fall in the right spot. Let's rename this corner cutout solid. Now we've got our two solids. Let's rename the first one to be hood base solid, and we'll drag in a new solid node, and we'll do a boolean between the two. Let's change the method of that to boolean operation. I'll link solid 0 to hood base solid, and then the corner cutout solid to solid 1, and the operation to be a difference. There we go, we've got a nice little cutout in the back corner now. Similarly, I'll set the family and part for this to be curtain wall and spandrel metal panel. That looks a lot nicer now. Finally, let's go through and rename this one to be hood solid, and with that selected, let's go back and select one of the orange ones, and right click and say colorize node. So if we zoom out, we can easily see now our outputs and all of the other nodes that we don't need in between. What we might do is actually go through and just set those to be invisible. I'll just select those ones there, zoom in a bit, turn off their visibility, and I'll do that for all the other nodes that we don't need to see in the final model. Excellent, with that all done, now we're ready to export our node. So let's click on save, and we'll go across to model, and we'll click generate node type. For this, let's type in dynamic facade panel. Remember, no spaces in that name. Select from GC model and select our base polygon. This should pretty much populate all of the dialog boxes for us. So the first being the base polygon, that needs to be replicable. Now let's select all of our variables to be optional, and we'll just set a default value so we don't have to type that when we place it. The one we won't set an initial value for is the input hood height. And that one we'll actually set to be replicable as well. Then I'll click on Store in your GC environment and click OK. And as you can see, now we have, in the node palette, we'll have a generated node palette with one called Dynamic Facade Panel. Now we've reached the end of part 3, we've generated our dynamic facade panel. In the next part of the series, we'll place this generated node type on our sample polygons and see how the dynamics are working. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.